I am really delighted to introduce Dr. Fiona Wood, who I first met and was deeply moved and impressed by in the wake of the terrible tragedy that befell our country in Bali in 2002. The attack on the Kuta, the club in Sari Club and Kelly's Bar in Kuta Beach in Bali was a warning sign to Australians that any suggestion that we were out of the ambit of terrorist attacks was misplaced. And of course, given the meeting takes place in the wake of the terrible tragedy in Christchurch, it's a reminder of that terrorism has no geographical boundaries. Dr. Wood, of course, was the head of the burns unit, Perth Hospital, and I think something like 28 to 30 victims of the attack in Bali were taken to treatment at Royal Perth Hospital. And of course, she presided over the relief of suffering and the suffering of people who've suffered in many cases, up to 90% burns to their bodies. The relief of that suffering was a true act of great humanity. And as an Australian, I'm very proud of the fact that in the early 90s, she had won worldwide acclaim for the special method of the pouring on method of treating burns, which reduced the level of scarring and has won her worldwide acclaim. Now, Fiona was born in a county called Yorkshire that's contributed a lot, not only to the English cricket team, but has also contributed a lot to Australia. I mean, a lot of people think of, when they think of Yorkshire, and now the football season started, a lot of people think of South Sydney and Sam Burgess. He was born in Yorkshire. I don't think of him because I don't barrack for South Sydney, but can I say that she met her husband, as so many Australians who ended up marrying English men and women in London, and they came, of course, to settle in Perth, and he is also a surgeon and have raised 6 children, and 1 or 2 of them are contributing to representing Australia in very great sporting endeavours. Fiona was recognised, I think, very appropriately as the Australian of the Year in 2005. And she consults at the Fiona Stanley Hospital as well as the Royal Perth Hospital, and is truly acclaimed as one of Australia's great medical figures of the last 30 years. And I am personally delighted to welcome her and to invite her to address you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for your kind introduction and for giving me the opportunity today to speak with you about the role, this place of science in Western civilization. I'm an absolute sucker for doing anything I've never done before. So when this invitation landed in my inbox, I was going to say on my desk, but that doesn't happen these days, does it? It pings in the inbox. I thought, oh, right, I'll have a go at that. And as we were just speaking, I have a personal thanks because I recently had bilateral knee replacements in the Hollywood Hospital, a Ramsay Hospital. And I chose that hospital because it had the best infection control record. And if anybody is going for joint replacements, that's the first thing to ask, because you don't want an infection. And so here I am this evening, and I'm thinking, well, how can I put into context my feelings around how I believe that we are in an extraordinarily exciting space. Science and technology is interwoven in our lives in a way we couldn't begin to unravel it. We get up in the morning, what we wear, we turn the light on, what we eat, and many of our jobs, our communication. It is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. And so really, how to put that into context with respect to the civilization? I was brought up by a storyteller, my father, and so I'd like to tell you a few stories. because I think that will give you really the context in which I'm operating the best way I can. So I'd like to, maybe some of you might even want to close your eyes and just imagine you're in the middle of the Midlands in England, cold, damp. It's the late 1800s. The coal mines are very muddy. The coal in that region is peat bog-like. It's not like the coal in Yorkshire, which is hard as nails, as my dad used to tell me. And there's a landslide. You've got 6 children. The eldest is 11. He's in bed. He's not down the pit that day, but your husband dies. They go knock on the door. You realize you have nothing. And so this woman gets the wheelbarrow, steals the wheelbarrow she can find, puts the small children in, and sets off walking. She's got an 11-year-old boy he can earn. She's got a 9-year-old boy he can earn as well. And so they walk to Yorkshire. And the 9-year-old and the 11-year-old find work. They would be my great-great-grandfather, one of them. And so they start working in the coal mines. And that's their lineage. Their sons and daughter of that particular line spend time in northern France. They're fortunate, they come home. But their sister doesn't. She's a nurse and dies with Spanish flu. You fast forward a little, that's my grandfather made it home. But his brother was so badly damaged from that experience that they sell him in indentured labor. So he works on a farm on the coal pit head so that the family have enough money to pay for Harry's treatment. That's my grandfather. My father goes down the mine when he's 14. There's a knock on the door. His school teacher comes with a pair of soccer boots and a letter. He's got a scholarship to the grammar school, and he's a gifted sportsman. His mother takes the studs out of the soccer boots. They're the only shoes he has, and he goes down the mine because the family need the money. Is that civilization? I think it's fascinating because it's actually not that long ago. I can't attest to the absolute accuracy because of my father's stories, because I'm sure he embellished here and there. In fact, I did a project at school on Florence Nightingale because I was convinced she treated one of my family members in the charge of the Light Brigade, courtesy of my father's stories. I realized sometime later that the numbers just didn't fit. And so, but I do know that as a 14-year-old, he and his brother were down the mine. They were pony drivers. And as a 13-year-old, I got a choice of an opportunity of a lifetime. But I'll come back to that. As a 13-year-old, I saw in the fields, again, the farm where my grandfather worked to earn money for his brother's treatment. I saw the fields where they brought the ponies out of the mines for the last time. Ponies with blinkers on because they've lived their life down the coal mine. And so I know some of it is true. And I know that really when my father and my mother, for that matter, were very focused on our education, they were so because it would give us an opportunity to get up in the morning and enjoy what we did. I think education is fundamental to our civilization. It's actually extraordinary that in that very short span of time, in the scheme of things, when you look at the Stephen Hawking sort of time frame and the Big Bang to now, we're talking 150 years. Those changes are rapid, they're disruptive, and they've only just begun. And so having an education is fundamental. I think it's fundamental for everyone. So there are many things I think we need to work out when we come to this, looking at this whole civilization issue, is have access to education, and access to an education that broadens the mind rather than narrows it, that engages in diversity, and an understanding that collectively we can do so much more than as individuals. And so, as I go forward then in my story, I went to medical school. As you heard, I just told you I had an opportunity of a lifetime based on a group of people that I came to know well, and that was the Society of Friends, the Quakers. In the next door village to me in England, there was a school. It was the Ackworth Friends School. I think the emphasis on friends. They were there, established in it previously been a foundling hospital, looking after those Victorian children and the earlier who were neglected and left and often sent to work. It's interesting that when my children were working on our farms, fast forward very many decades later, they did go on strike. And their placards said that child labour had been outlawed in Victorian era. What did we think as parents we were doing? And we were teaching them the value of work, the value of a job well done. But again, I'll come back to that. And so, as a 13-year-old, I was destined to go to the comprehensive school in the local village, where at that time the standard was to leave at the end of year equivalent of year 10. My mother wrote to the then Minister for Education, who wrote back and said, she's not university material, don't worry about it. My eldest brother had left school, my next brother was at grammar school. My eldest brother did end up with a Cambridge law degree and a criminal defense lawyer before he unfortunately died as a 33-year-old. My next brother is a professor of orthopedics in Perth as well now, has been for a while. And then I came along. And so my mother saw this school, the Society of Friends. It seemed welcoming. It was there in all the old buildings had been there, as I say, since very early in the 1700s. And so she went along for an interview as a house mother. And it said, she figured that she was a mother. She lived in a house, can't be that hard. And she got a job. But she got a job as a physical education instructor. She'd been a PTI in the WAF. She had no qualifications. But it meant I could go to a school which changed my life. I understand civilization because I understand kindness. I was taught kindness in that place. I was taught the value of doing something for someone else without personal gain. The school motto was non sibi sed omnibus. So I think in this context of Western civilization, where is the kindness? And we must strive to maintain the kindness. I think it is a fundamental for us all to understand the value of doing something for someone in need, someone that we may never know, someone that actually will be better off because you're on this planet. That is what civilization is to me. And that's what I learned as a very impressionable young girl in those cold Yorkshire mornings as we were running round the fields, and I learned also that I was never going to be a runner, and so I better stick to the academic side of things. And so when they start to think about science, I recall one of the earliest experiences I had of a scientist with passion was my teachers. My chemistry teacher, my physics teacher, my maths teacher were just extraordinary men. I had the great fortune of sitting down at my father's funeral 6 years ago with my physics teacher, who's still alive. He was 96, unfortunately has passed since, asking me, what is new, Fiona? What is new in your world? And so we discussed the fact that, and I will share with you now, that because of my interest in neurophysiology, my interest in the brain, and interest in things that I've been interested in all the way since I was at school and in his physics class, the electricity along a nerve. How do we interpret pain when it's just electricity and chemistry? That is something to ponder. And I can tell you, if you are burnt here, your nerves will change here and your brain will change here. And maybe one day we will use that information to think ourselves whole. That is the power of science. Based in physics, based in chemistry, based in imagination, based in our civilization, where we give the support to those who dream. So back in those days, I got the opportunity to go to this school, as I've said, and it changed my life. From there, I got the opportunity to go to medical school, where I saw science on a daily basis, up front and personal. There is nothing like a medical school to see a vast array of science and technology that we had achieved to this point. And I'd like to take you again in a bit of a journey with me, a journey into an operating theatre. I'm sure a number of you have been there, but I'm sure, I hope that you don't remember it. But you'll be pleased to know that I do, because I'm there on the other side of the fence. I remember the first operating theatre I walked into in St. Thomas's Hospital Medical School. The environment was electric. Walking into this environment, straight off the bat, what's on the walls linked into the floor such that there's no nooks and crannies from an infection control perspective. Looking at the equipment, the microscope, it was a microsurgical case. Because right from the bat, I was researching with the plastic surgeons. So there's the lighting system with the Zeiss lenses and the microscope with the robotic arms, hinged arms, so that they could come over and actually focus in and sew together blood vessels. They were 2 and 3 millimeters with sutures, with the needle swayed to the plastic suture, such that when you push that through the blood vessel, it doesn't tear, but it leaves a small hole that closes around the suture behind it. You could tie a knot. And the knot, it's not just straightforward. You tie in a knot in something that has to lose its memory so that the knot doesn't untie itself. We talk about memory in certain sutures and certain chemistry because it wants to untie itself, and we've got to overcome that so that the knots stay tight and withstand the blood pressure that's pumping with the oxygen, keeping the person alive, the blood flow going around. I clearly was overwhelmed, and I clearly am still. Because that environment that advances to this point and keeps going down this road, this juggernaut that we call science, that keeps moving, has changed lives. It changes lives on the macro level. It changes lives on the individual level. It gives us an opportunity for quality of life that is unprecedented. I absolutely fundamentally understand the inequalities across the world with respect to nutrition. We've got some serious challenges. Why have we got the indulgent overweight and we've got the starving? That's a challenge for us all. Because there's certainly enough food on this planet to feed us all. So how do we melt that civilization, that acknowledgement that it's the right thing to do, and actually put that into practice? And I'm sure if you think, don't probably half a second, you know somebody who's volunteering in some way, shape, or form, or maybe you are yourself, or helping save the children, or whoever it may be, to make a difference, again, to somebody you may never know, but knowing that their life is better because of yours. So this juggernaut that we keep driving forward, this science and technology, engineering, maths, we all talk about STEM these days. I make a real plug for talking about STEAM, because I think we have to put it into context. We have to put it into the context of our whole society, our communities. And we can't do that without bringing us all along with it And that's not science in isolation, it's science as part of civilization. And so as I go forward in my own personal journey, I see that I absolutely focused on how we can do better. I see suffering every day, and it's my privilege to do something about it. One of the most extreme times of my life you've heard about. But it wasn't just my life that changed around that period of time, it was many lives. Many lives changed and were never the same again. But I certainly came forward and through that, knowing that the only way we can respect those who suffer and those who may not survive is by ensuring that we aggressively engage in learning so that tomorrow is better. And those learnings can be in the sphere of science and technology and data analytics, but they can be in the appreciation of beauty. They can be in the appreciation of understanding how we can integrate and work forwards together. And so when I look at the changes, I start to think, well, where to next? Where to next, and how can we pay the respect to those whose shoulders we stand on, the giants who've gone before us? And you think of how science started. Did it start in the Renaissance and the Royal Society in England, and the changes, the arguments around these learned men having about whether the world was flat or round, and then going forward to the Luddites, concerned about their livelihood and the capacity to feed their children. And I think now, let's stand back and let's look. I think we're in kind of an interesting situation. We've got an acceleration of technology and science in such a way right here, right now, that can we actually integrate it in a fair and equitable way? And are we in a space that maybe look back and think we were in a round world, flat world scenario? Or are we in a Luddite type scenario? When we look at artificial intelligence, how are we going to engage with the capacity that we have at our fingertips without ensuring that we drive down an artificial stupidity path? Taking the opportunities that we have and making sure that we don't imprint upon it, our intrinsic bias. That we let our imaginations really roam free so that we actually imagine what tomorrow can be for the better of us all. And so 25 years ago, as you've heard, we started on a path in the burn service where I know that if you have a significant amount of your burn surface damaged, I need to repair it. We've moved way beyond what we could with respect to burn injuries over the years. The intensive care teams can keep our patients alive, but we need then to repair the skin, because without that skin repair, it is all they're doing is buying us time. And so healing that skin wound early has become an absolute focus of my life, and it illustrates, I think, many things I want to really share with you today. Those young people amongst you, in 1990, I was a good deal younger. Yeah? There was a patient that changed my life. I wasn't even working in the hospital where she was in intensive care at the time, but I could see her massive burn injury was such that the waves of infection kept crashing over her, and she was weakening. And as the weeks went by and I went into that hospital for our training, our teaching rounds, I could see her fading, falling between our fingers like sand, and then I heard a radio station. And I heard on this radio station that Joanne Pawlowski and Professor John Masterton in Monash University had been to Boston, and they'd learned how to grow skin cells into skin cell sheets. I went to the consultant who was in charge of the case. I said, I think we could take her skin. We could send it to Melbourne, and I think we may be able to save her life. He said, well, if you can find the money, you can do it. I went to the administrator of the hospital, it was Royal Perth Hospital at the time, who became a great friend and an extraordinary supporter. I said, Mr. Beresford, you don't know me. I don't really work at your hospital. I'm one of the young doctors. But there's a patient in your hospital whose life I think we can save if we send some skin to Melbourne. And they will grow it there and they will bring it back. And it's her skin because your skin is so precious to you. It has to be you. And so then he said, well, if you get the money, you can do it. So I did a cold call to Ansett CEO. In those days, they put me through. I just said, Doctor, I'm Dr. Wood. It seemed to work. And so I said, I'm Dr. Wood, and you don't know me, but I'm one of the young doctors at the hospital, and I'm a plastics and reconstructive surgeon, and we treat the burn patients. And there's a lady dying, but I think she might be able to survive if you can fund just a specimen. It won't take up a seat, just a small box. But if you could bring it back with a person, with a scientist, it would be really appreciated. They flew the specimen to Melbourne, they flew Prof and Joanne back, and enough skin in sheets to cover the patient. We worked away in the bone marrow laboratory, which is a very, again, amazing environment. And just stop there for a moment. Bone marrow laboratory. I would hazard a guess there's a few of you in the audience who know someone who lives as a result of a bone marrow transplant. Extraordinary science, extraordinarily powerful. And so I met Marie Stoner there, and we were working away on the skin, and we went into the operating theatre, and we put the skin cells on in sheets, and she survived. I'd rotated back through the hospital. She was in rehabilitation when she had a sudden cardiac arrest from which we could not salvage, and she didn't survive. And I'd like to think, to imagine how wretched I felt at that point in time, as standing by the bed, resuscitating the patient. Felt self-indulgent. It was a fraction compared to how her family felt, and that was my next job, to go and explain what had happened. And I learned a lot about myself that day, and I learned a coping strategy that has taken me through from there to now. To honor that, I had to learn something. I had to learn so that others would survive because of the learnings around her. As an individual, the science and technology that we applied to that individual in that context was the very best we could worldwide at that point in time. I had scoured the literature. I had left no stone unturned, and I say to those youngsters in the audience, if you have an idea, never let it go. As my mum used to say, grasp the nettle with both hands and don't let it go. You'll always find somebody to help you. You just have to ask and ask, and don't be put off if people say no. Just keep asking, you'll find them. There's a lot of good people out there, far many more good people than not, actually. And so, can I tell you that people have survived because of the learnings on that day? Absolutely, yes. The time to healing is a huge focus. Can we grow and can we cover the skin, the burn surface in less than 5 months, which is what we had waited? Had I heard that radio station earlier, would it have made a difference? Possibly yes. But her life has made a difference to many others. And if you come into Western Australia with a burn of around 80% of your body surface area, 50% of our patients will survive. And so then as I go forward and I think, well, that is an individual, the life of an individual that has been the recipient of so much over her life, living in Western civilization, but whose life was cut short, but has contributed to that science and technology, not by being a scientist, but by being part of the society, part of our community, by being human. And so, as we go forward, I think it's fascinating that I've already told you that maybe one day we'll be able to think ourselves whole, given the right building blocks. Every one of you self-organizes to a shape that's recognizable through life. We may get bigger and smaller, as I've already kind of whinged about that a bit, but if we're recognizable. What drives self-organization? What drives us to repair our surface? Certainly we age. We don't really understand. We've started exploring genetics. In an, again, unprecedented way. But then how does that genetics link to the cells? How do the cells within our structure express themselves? The epigenetics, the punctuation that we see in the genetics. And we started working there, and I can tell you that in a scar, the cells look exactly the same down the microscope as the cells in your normal skin, but they're behaving differently. And we have now technology that can single cell sequence. So I can tell you that within a scar, whether there's one cell population or many. And understanding that, can I unscar the scar? Can we turn that around by understanding? And this scar isn't just about burn injury in the skin and aesthetics. It's about function. It's about the scar in your heart after the heart attack. It's about the scar in your brain after your stroke. It's about the scar in your liver. It's about the scar around the excision of your cancer. Understanding this, again, opens up doors such that for each and every one of us living in this civilization that we like to call Western, can benefit with an improvement in the quality of our life. But as I've said, it's just the beginning. This isn't the end of the road, it's the beginning of the road. And the acceleration is extraordinary. We know that there's more information out there than there is knowledge, and I will clarify that. We have so much information in health and medicine that isn't applied. We have tried so hard to understand the barriers to translation into clinical practice. It's a whole movement in of itself. And then understanding how to change that information into knowledge, into experience, so that we can learn from that experience and feed back and generate more information. And how can one brain think of that? Well, those one brains only come through, probably, no, I was just going to say once in a lifetime, but less than that. How many Einsteins have we got? How many Hawkins, Newtons? We know them. Absolute giants that stand on the shoulders. And someone asked me recently, as a child who inspired me, and I'll have to really make a confession here. The first person I said as a child that inspired me, well, I said there were two women. Dorothy Hyman and Valerie Wild. Valerie Peach, she became, as she married. They were runners. They were coal miners' daughters who went to the Olympic Games. They went out of the village. They went across the world, and they ran, and they felt the air in their face in Mexico and Tokyo. And they were coaches I had as a kid. The fact that they had spread their wings opened my eyes to the big, wide world out there. But I followed that up very closely by saying, but then there was this kind of Russian cosmonaut chick, because I really wanted to be an astronaut, but I wanted to be the first, and she was the first in space. But bottom line is, when I went to medical school, there was a woman in St. Mary's Hospital who was a surgeon. And she was a surgeon and almost retired in the 70s. And to be a surgeon in those days, now that was inspirational. And so when you start to think about the Einsteins and the Newtons of our world, behind that there's a whole lot of people there that need our support, and that we can harness their inspiration and their imagination and jump on with the coattails and stand on those shoulders as we go forward. Because in fact, what we will be able to do, I think, if we start to imagine 10 and 50 years down the track, is going to be extraordinary. I was in an operation 18 months ago. Sorry, I'll come back to that. So, I've told you how my life was changed by one individual patient. And the time to heal him became fundamentally important. And as a result of that, Marie Stoner and myself worked away understanding that the layer between your surface waterproof layer of your skin and the deeper, tough layer of your skin is called the dermis and the epidermis. That junction is the engine room of the skin. We worked out how harvesting that, not to just grow into sheets, but to spray on as individual cells onto a wound, could change the healing paradigm. And we could change it, that technology, from about 3 weeks it takes to grow a sheet. We got sheets. Marie was extraordinary. She could grow sheets in 10 days. We could spray the suspension on in 5 days. And then we put it all together in a point-of-care kit. We put the first stages of the tissue engineering process, took it out of the laboratory, took it into the operating theatre, and in 20 minutes, we can harvest cells from that individual's dermal epidermal junction and spray directly onto the wound to seed the cells of that person on that to close down the wound. Yesterday, I was operating at the Children's Hospital. I did 2 such cases. 2 small children, within a week of their burn injury, they had the operation, their dresses will be changed in a week, and 80% of our children will have no visible scar as a result of this technology. It's best in our kids, but we've moved the paradigms of scarring in the adults as well. So we were able to take the current state of the technology 25 years ago and change it, and move it, manipulate it, and invent, and put that in a box, again, by asking for help. And asking for help with people with electronics, people CSL with the enzyme, Go Medical with the electronics. The company that helped us near the airport in plastic molding, because it's in like a plastic box that's all self-contained. That mold that we manufactured in the late 1990s in Welshpool in Perth is still used in Ventrex in California to make the kit now. The kit that has got FDA approval last year, in association working with the American military and Avita Medical. So I was in an operation 18 months ago, and I want to use this as a really example of how it's never going to be the end. You're never going to get to the top of the Everest. In science and technology, you're never going to put your flag on the top of the Everest. It's all about the journey, and every achievement, and certainly every step back is the day you really learn the hard lessons. It's an opportunity. Every day is an opportunity to think about how we can do better tomorrow. And so we can never stop thinking and stop understanding who can have parts of your jigsaw, who can you work with. And so 18 months ago, we were in an operation. A young boy, he was 4 years old. He had a flame burn to 50% of his body, down to his muscle. We resuscitated him, kept him alive for 48 hours, stabilized him, took him to the operating room, removed all the burn. We put him in a massive dressing, like a giant sponge, to remove all the swelling. The science and technology to get to that point, extraordinary. And then the next day, which was a Sunday morning, we took him back again into the operating room where we'd controlled the swelling, and we put on a framework, a collagen and glycosaminoglycans framework with a plastic layer on the top, a silicone layer on the top, and we tailored it all around his body, around his neck, under his arms, and I was teaching the team how to tailor so that we'd held this again with the giant sponge dressing, with the machines to keep it all firm and tight so that the blood supply could grow into this. Tissue-guided regeneration. We know that when we have that close opposition between the blood vessels can grow in, the cells migrate into this framework and express themselves as skin. Tissue-guided regeneration. And it will look down the microscope like the deeper layer of skin. No hair follicles, no sweat glands. But when it goes well, it goes very well and replaces dermis. And then 3 weeks and 2 days later, we came and we peeled off the silicone outside, and we used skin grafts, traditional skin grafts, stretched them right out like a string vest, and then made our skin spray with our kit and sprayed the cells all over him. And at 6 weeks, he was healed and home. That's the state of the art, 2017, Still state of the art, 2019. And everybody was very happy with the result. This boy had survived. He was set on a trajectory. Well, certainly with his growth, we will have to consider his growth and his movement. And we will, with laser therapy, trying to unscar the scar, and we'll be driving the releases to allow him to grow over his development. And as we stood around and we debriefed after what was a significant and extraordinary case, it was very reminiscent of me from my youth, where we used to get burns from night dresses, catching light from open fires. Very similar, a sort of bit of a blast from the past. I said, well, 25 years ago, this team changed the paradigm. We took growing skin in the laboratory and we took it to the bedside and we sprayed the skin cells on for the first time in 1994. How about we spray all skin on, the skin construct? How about we take these 3D printers that everybody's talking about, that are our future and that are our opportunities for the future? How about we take these 3D printers and we take it to the bedside and we print skin? In these last 18 months, I've been in negotiations and collaborations with a number of groups here in Sydney, obviously in Perth, in Queensland, in the US, and in the UK. And I'd like you to imagine a system where you come into the operating room. Currently, I will take a sharp knife and I will remove the burn, and I'll remove the burn until I see pinpoint bleeding, because then I know the tissue in the base of that wound is alive. I'm sure you'd all agree that's not desperately subtle. There is an eye knife, 8 of them in the world, and this eye knife, intelligent knife, captures the plume. It's a laser knife. It captures the smoke coming from the laser and does real-time chemistry analysis so it can tell the condition of the cell that it is cutting through. I want one in my Christmas stocking. So I'll be with them again in a few weeks when I traveling to the UK to get one of these eye knives in Perth linked to our National Omics Centre that is opening up. Because the 8 eye knives around the world, the vast majority are being used in trials to cut through around a cancer, and they can tell whether the cell being cut through is a cancerous cell or not, so that the margins of the tumor, the margins of that cancer can be told real time. That is the power of linking science and technology, such that you don't have to come back for further excision of your cancer. Yet you don't have to suffer a broader tissue loss, people having to take more of your way than necessary. I want to drive this technology so that I can into a trauma scenario, salvaging what is survivable, removing what is not. Not just in burns, but in all trauma, because we know that trauma changes, surviving a trauma will change you for life. So the more accurate I can be, or we can be, at that time, the better. So with our NH and MRC, we have been successful with a group of folks from Queensland, us, and New South Wales to build the library of understanding around the chemistry that we need in trauma that is distinct from malignancy, and to see where it overlaps and where it doesn't. And then the second phase of that, you can imagine. Imagine a car wash, right? The first part of the car wash, I want to remove all what's wrong, whether it's a cancer or the burn or the bad tissue that's not got a blood supply. The second part of the car wash, I need to understand what it is that I'm dealing with. What is the extent of the deficit? And so we're working with the CRC in spatial imaging. They do an enormous amount with the oil and gas companies, and they came to us and said, would our 3D spatial imaging help you? Well, yes. And so we've linked with a group around the world, again, different scientists, different group, where we've started scanning images of burns, images of wounds, because we can feed that 3D information back into the next phase of the car wash. Because I would like us one day to give the building blocks, the bio-ink, that will self-assemble the scaffold, give the cells of you from a non-injured space, whether it be your fat or your skin, and put that, bioprint that into the wound. And such that you've got the building blocks and the mental imagery to think yourself whole. And then I wake up. But seriously, standing back from that, the progress we've made in 18 months is breathtaking. I can tell you another line of work we're involved in that takes us right down and into this artificial intelligence data analytics space. And when I was with a group of people 2 weeks ago in Sydney talking about data in health, an area there we've really got to understand the interface with our civilization, with our community, our society, that interface, privacy, ownership around data is something we could debate long and hard, but the power of that data is extraordinary. And I'd like to finish, before you ask me all sorts of really difficult questions, with a story around data. And it starts with n equals 1. A little bit like I started as a young person in 1990. n equals 1. One person can change your life. An 8-year-old boy who had an 80% body surface area burn in 2003. And again, we thought we did the absolute sterling job. We removed the burn. We used our Integra, the tissue-guided engineered template that I've discussed. We put the split-thickness skin grafts, the traditional grafts, meshed way out and sprayed cells over. And he healed, and he sent us postcards from Outdoor Ed Camp. He died as an 11-year-old with a rare cancer. n equals 1. My colleagues told me it was a bad luck and a coincidence. Bad luck? Coincidence? That did not sit well with me. I needed to investigate. I needed to satisfy my curiosity on one level, but on another level, I had to honor that death. I had to look at his parents in the eye and say, we have done everything, not just while he was alive, but subsequently, to reduce the suffering of those that come subsequent to him. And I know in Western Australia at the time, it was one of the world leaders in data linkage. Fiona Stanley has done extraordinary work. If you look up Telethon Institute and the folate story, that's a story to make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Changing neural tube defects, neurological deficits in our children, not just here, but across the world. Extraordinary work. And I knew her because we were kind of part of a club. She had been Australian the year 2 years before me. And so I knew her as an extraordinary woman. And so she helped me nag the teams because I said, no, you won't see anything. The numbers aren't right. There's this, there's that. And I wouldn't go away. And eventually in 2009, we had an NHMRC grant and we linked the database with burns, with the cancer database, with the hospital database, all this de-identified data that we have in health. In Western Australia, we linked it, and I can tell you that 96% of the children in that database of 34,000 and 84% of the adults were not major burns. But there is an increase in change in your life trajectory after you have survived a burn injury. It appears to unmask the diseases of aging, your cardiac diseases, cancers, neurological diseases, all appear to be slightly increased, as if your life trajectory has been shortened maybe by 7-10 years. That's simplistic. I must apologize to my data linkage teams, because that is, as I say, an enormous amount of work put in a breath. But we understand that it has changed the life trajectory in mental illness as well. And so the n equals 1 led us right up to 34,000 patients with hospital for burn injury in Western Australia, and we compared it to 120,000 age, sex, geospatial and socioeconomic non-burnt individuals in our community. And we've found out all sorts of novel information that has changed the way we think about burns across the world. We then linked with IBM Watson Drug Discovery Platform, because that is a computer that could win a game show. And I said to the guys, yeah, I'm good at cold calls. I said, yeah, you don't know me, but are you IBM Drug Discovery? You won Jeopardy. And I said, well, if you can win a game show, can you do something really useful? Because I hear you're doing some interesting cancer work with the Sloan Kettering Hospital. And they go, yeah, yes. So, can I come and meet you? And eventually, we got them to Perth. And there's 30 million medical abstracts in that database. There's patent data. There's all sorts of amazing data in that database, and you can interrogate it. But it needs to learn. And you've got to be very careful you don't imprint your intrinsic bias on it. And after a few, they came for a 6-week training course with us, and our team was, they walked in and saw the Burns team. Is this you? And we go, yeah, well, not many of us. But we'll make up in enthusiasm the lack of numbers, promise. And so we worked away, and I said, wow, we've got the power of this, and we're asking it a binary question. Cancer, burns. Let's go Zen here. Let's really see if we can make this machine steam. Let's understand how we can interrogate this at many different levels. And that's work that we're involved in now. And the IBM have funded some of our research work so that we can then cross-reference and check. We have genetic information from patients, 1,000 of our patients, that relate to their SCAR outcome. And we've put that information into Watson Drug Discovery to see if we can find the linking pathways that have driven a change in your structure of your body remote from the burn, which may associate with an increase in cancer. It's fascinating because we can learn from lots of different places. I work with data analytics, I work with neurophysiologists, I work with cardiologists, work with infectious disease people, I work with engineers. I could talk about the power of science and discovery until you all turn to dust. But I'd like to leave you with the thought that, we're all in this together. I remember my life changing again, January of 2005. I was asked a number of questions that day as I was walking up the stairs to receive a very nice glass trophy from Mr. Howard that one of my children, Mr. Nobody, has broken in my house. And as I was walking up the stairs, I was asked, you are Australian, aren't you? And I go, no, does it matter? In my best Yorkshire accent. And it was like, I'm kidding. Yes, I am. Promise, I am Australian. But what is it that you want to share with Australia? And it became really, I guess, something that I've thought a lot about since. I wanted to share with Australia that I had seen the power of basic science at the bedside. I have seen the change in suffering. I have seen the power of science and technology. And I've seen it in the cultural context here, and I've seen it across the world in less fortunate environments. I work as part of the International Burn Society, where we have a mantra, one world, one standard of burn care. It's an aspirational goal, one we strive towards by sharing our knowledge and our energy and our time. But as a part of all that, I found myself in the very north of Western Australia, where you could smell the dry. I'd traveled from Broome across the top end, and I'd been in many communities. I'd seen things that had taken my breath away in our Indigenous communities across in that environment. And there I was on the beach having a barbecue at Columbaroo Mission. And one of the ladies who'd taken me around, Indigenous ladies my age, we were there with our kids and our grandkids, and she goes, wow, one of life's good women, good people. And I go, whoa, what motivates you? And she looked me straight in the eye and said, to do the best for my children, what about you? And it took me back on my heels, like, yes. When we start to think of this science and technology, I'm a nerd, I am a self-confessed nerd. Clearly, I don't get out much because, as I said, I could talk until you draft you to dust about the power of science, technology, data analytics, the opportunities of our future. But I am a mother and a grandmother now. And I am a believer in people. I'm a believer in the uniqueness of each and every one of us, and I'm a believer in a society dependent upon the integrity of each and every one of us, not the intellect of a few, and certainly not driven by the negative. I believe in goodness in people, and I think that is what we need to harness. We need to harness the goodness. We need to harness the positive energy, and we need to do so such that our science and technology of the future shines, and we leave a history behind us that we are proud of. Thank you very much.
I'd like to hone in around the developments around AI, science, and in a cultural context. It's an area I've done some professional work in, and I note that whereas in the past the leaders around some of these technologies have been in the Western societies, we now see quite a rise in AI research out of China. And one of the reasons for that is the availability of large data sets, because they don't have the sort of constraints around collecting data that we tend to have in the Western sphere. I wonder if I could ask you to reflect about are some of the technological developments simply quite totalitarian at heart? Are we going to have certain forms of balances in the Western civilization to manage technologies as they develop?
I think that's absolutely an insightful question, because I think if we want 1984, we stand back and let it go. It's not my problem, not my job. But if we want actually something we're proud of, then we stand up and we're counted. We engage in the debate. We engage in finding innovative solutions. We understand how we can use different privacy frameworks, how we can engage in blockchain or whatever it may be, so that we understand the usefulness, but not at the compromise of the individual. And we will only do that in a way that we are proud of, by engaging, stepping up, engaging in the debate as a country, because it's being driven very aggressively in a whole raft of places, as you indicate, and with different agendas. Well, if we stand back and let it run, well, you can't complain at the end of the day that it doesn't work for you. And I think very strongly about this, that we are intelligent people, we are well educated. Well, let's actually use it. And let's work out how we can encourage our young people to think differently, so that we have innovative solutions that we can then present to the rest of the world. Because there is no doubt, if we put our head in the sand, it'll swamp us. It's not going away in that context. And I don't feel comfortable in the 1984 scenario, But I do feel comfortable in thinking about cognitively offloading from routine tasks, so that we can let the imagination fly and think about what the tomorrow will be. Think about how we can drive change for the next 100 years, so that maybe we can have food equality across the world, or whatever it may be. Yeah? So I think it's beholden on each and every one of us taking the responsibility for our education, our training, and not stepping back, but stepping forward. I know that's very emotive, but I think the more of us that step forward, then it's easier for others.
Yeah, thank you so much. Simple question. I'm a scientist. My own view is that civilization has come from science, and it sounds a lot like that in your narrative. Does civilization come from science, or does science come from civilization?
You said that was an easy question. Yeah, simple question to articulate. I think it's fascinating when you look back at civilization. If you take that definition in that context, well, what happened to the Aztecs? I said earlier today, were the Romans really caught hopping, just having one too many grapes peeled for them? What really happened? Do we really know? And I'd have to say, I'm not sure we do. And so when we look at civilization, we look at a civilization based on science. Is ours any different? When you look at some of the medical things you see in the tombs of Egypt, that's extraordinary. And so I think it is a really interesting question you pose. Which comes first? Which is the chicken and which is the egg? But there's no doubt that the bottom line is people. There's humans in there. And a human society coming together, solving problems. Is that civilization or is that science? And in our context, it's science. But is there anything new under the sun? In the Aztecs, they were able to manipulate gold in extraordinary ways. And that's science. So I think we do well to step back a little bit here and there and have a think about that, particularly in context of our next steps around the AI and the sort of acceleration that we face. So, simple question to articulate, but I think we could all debate for days. But possibly we should go back and look at some of the work around the linguists. I know science fiction's a bit of a thing of mine, and there was a movie recently put in a scientist with a linguist, and looking at how you could unravel some of the secrets of the past might not be a bad idea. And interestingly, on that note, I was listening to the radio, and the kids in China who read science fiction did better in their university entrance exams. So I guess, is it science fiction, or is it been there before? And I can't answer that question. That gets us into the swirling wheat fields in the south of England, doesn't it? And the Stonehenge. Good things to ponder.
Thanks, that was wonderful. I appreciate the creativity, the imagination, and the experimentation and bravery behind your story. And I live in that world too, in my own career in another space, but I also know that you don't do that without a significant amount of criticism. And I also know that the scientific community tends to demand proof, something that frustrates me a lot, and I know you've been the subject of some criticism on that score. In other words, running ahead of clinical trials and proof. I wonder what your commentary is on that, or if you're willing to make a comment on the sort of battle between conservatism and creativity that happens, I think, in every field, but I know it happens in science as well.
I think I'm happy to answer that on a couple of levels. One, I sort of alluded to earlier, there's no point in engaging with negative. Just keep on going until you find somebody that's positive and help you solve a problem. And I think I learned very early on in my career in medicine, when I was told as a girl I couldn't be a surgeon, that, well, I could spend time fighting that person, or I could go and find somebody who was going to give me a job, And so I think negative criticism without engagement in problem solving is a black hole to avoid at all costs. And so therefore, when I've been criticized by people with respect to lack of clinical trials when they haven't actually read the clinical trials that have been published, then clearly that's not my problem. I mean, it sounds blunt, but my energy is the only thing I've got, my time and energy, and that's best spent going into an arena where criticism with positive engagement in problem solving is life's blood. So working with people who say, yeah, Fiona, that's a rubbish idea, but have you thought about the spin-off X, Y, and Z, and we could do this, this, and that? Now that is the sort of person that I've connected with over my years, and certainly not wasted time in engaging in negative energy, engaging in criticism. I mean, that indicates, well, there's been no prospective randomized clinical trial in X. Well, you can't actually do a prospective clinical trial in X, but have you seen A, B, and C that's already been done, published by us, and that's fine? Because X is impossible, and that's why we put it on the table, and we all know that. So I'm not going to go there, yeah? So that's black hole. That's the black hole stuff. You get sucked down that black hole, and I'd have to say, this is probably speaking out of turn, because one job I admire our politicians, because I'd never do it, right? Because how negative it is, And I think it's so sad that there's such intelligent people with so much to give get sucked into that black hole now and again. Bit too much. Sorry, speaking out of turn, because I think to give an opportunity for those people to soar would be just so much better for all of us, yeah? But so I think keeping out of that negative vortex is really important.
Thank you. It really is inspiring. I almost thought to myself, maybe the time has come at the age of 69 to enroll at medical school. The question I want to ask is this, or rather I want to make a statement initially. The one subject about which science has nothing to say is the human, is around meaning. How do we live fulfilled lives? The other part of Western civilization. That's one side of it. The other side is hubris. We developed atom bombs. That story is still unfolding. And we have this attitude known as scientism, where science is seen, or scientific knowledge, is seen as the only knowledge worth having, because it's verifiable, there's evidence. But what about the human? What about these folk that we refer to as our fellow human beings? How are we going to live lives? I'm concerned for my grandchildren. What sort of world are they going into? I'm not concerned that they won't get proper medical attention or won't be the beneficiaries of science. That's not my concern. My concern is, what kind of world are we going into where science, as it were, has been let off the rein?
Well, I think that's an interesting, I was following your train of thought, and then, as you said, science has been let off the rein. Has it really? I'm not so sure it has. And certainly in my space, and the question just before, there is an element of inertia in science, as well as in medicine and surgery, that ensures, I think, that it isn't let off the rein. And there's a responsibility to justify ideas in frameworks that are more or less rigid. So I'm not sure science has been let off the rein, but I think the other aspect of your question, I think, is really fascinating. As I feel that I've, on a personal level, landed out of a coal mining village into a Quaker school as a 13-year-old with eyes wide open, ears wide, my whole soul open, if I'm brutally honest. So impressionable at that time, at that side of your life. And I got what it meant to be kind. In a way that I think where your question is really going. A bit of kindness. You walk down the street with your heads down, and somebody might say, "Oh, like your blingy shirt or whatever." You go, "Oh, right," and that tiny little bit of interaction, tiny little bit of kindness, changes the colour of your day. Ridiculous, yeah, but means something, and that's where you're going with that part. I think, and I think really we need to maybe give a little bit of time to actually thinking about the ideas that are locked not in proof, but ideas are locked in values and feelings. And I see that every day. Yeah, I alluded to that. Like, how is it electricity and chemistry pain? Something as basic as that. And I see that every day. I can't pin it down. I can't nail it. I describe it in different ways, but I know I'm not coming anywhere near understanding the feeling of fear, of discomfort, of agitation, of sheer loss of control for that person right there. I can try and do the best I can to influence that for their better. But point of fact is, I can't describe it. So I think you're right in that looking at those ideas And as they unravel, we may be able to, like, it's the whole spectrum from neuropsychology all the way down to neurophysiology. We may know a little bit about neurophysiology, and it will move the goalposts slowly, slowly. But consciousness, really? We're so far away from understanding that there's always going to be that aspirational goal. There's always going to be a driver, I think, that will keep us moving as a society, as a civilization.
I think we're going to have to show a bit of kindness to Can we just take 2 more quick questions?
I hope this will be a quick question. You're obviously in the field of medicine, and you've been talking more generally about technology. I think early in your talk you made a remark, I don't forget the exact words, but it was something like, we're only at the beginning. Now, medicine traditionally has been about healing, restoring, but of course, with technology taken off as it has, a lot of people hope and intend that it will do a lot more than that. And I wonder if you have thoughts about this, specifically about the so-called Transhumanist Project. The idea that, for instance, at some point in the perhaps not too distant future, it might literally be possible to abandon human bodies as we know them and live on a microchip. I think that's what Nigel Bostwick, that's his name from Oxford, has suggested. I find it a horrendous idea. I hope it's not even possible, but I wouldn't know. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I probably shot myself in the foot by saying I was a real sci-fi nut. And I think I'd have to say, living on a slide in a lab doesn't fill me with joy at all. And I think that might be where we start to answer that question and think about my feelings about this. I understand the power of prosthetics. I treat a boy who had meningococcal septicemia as a 15-month-old babe, and he's lost 4 limbs. He's thriving now, but the possibility of him having prosthetics that will give him a quality of life in the future is very powerful. Yes. But when you start to go into the beyond that, I don't think I'm a conservative person, and I don't think particularly lack imagination. But I get to that point where I think, that kind of sci-fi is very much in that sci-fi space. And I don't think that with our artificial intelligence and that kind of thing, it is limited by us. I don't believe that it will be in a situation where the machines will develop consciousness. I know it's talked about, but I just can't conceptualize that. And so when you start to put that into the sort of transhuman, I think, yes, I think sci-fi gives us unleashes our imagination, but really there are some things that I think may be the downfall of civilization. And then we're not talking about a human civilization, therefore. If we're talking about consciousness in machines, that's not human civilization. And so if we're talking about living on a microchip, that's not human. And so that, I could say, is really beyond my conscious capacity to conceptualize at this point. And something that I don't think the fear of it should stop us engaging in exploration of science and technology for the betterment of our civilization, but I think an awareness of limitations is very appropriate.